So, the last time I talked about the Xeno franchise on this channel, I was left pretty disappointed with how Saga Episode 2 was handled. It had some good in it, sure, but for the most part, it was a massive downgrade compared to the first title. And honestly, I was a little apprehensive of starting the third one as a result. I was going to play it at some point, but it's one of those things where you're just not really certain if you want to continue a series right away due to how much of a letdown the title before it was. But I also wanted to get this video out since I was still, doing a Xeno marathon. So I bit the bullet and jumped into Xenosaga 3, and oh my god, what a massive fucking improvement. For a title that was basically supposed to be 4 games in 1, and was coming off the heels of arguably the worst Xeno game I had played, this game not only slammed it out of the park and handled everything about it as perfectly as it could have, but after experiencing it, I'd argue this is one of the best games on the PS2. Not just best JRPGs, best games. But what does it do so phenomenally that it earns it all this praise? And was there anything that it screwed up on? Well, how about we stop this intro and get into my review to find out. Starting off with one of the many things that this game does right, we need to talk about how not only does this game look absolutely incredible, but it also ends up fixing the visual issues the second game had. Well, Saga 2 definitely had some strengths in its visuals in terms of its really strong cutscene direction. A lot of the game is held back immensely visually by just how fucking ugly a lot of the character model redesigns looked. I'd argue that one of the reasons the game sold as poorly as it did was because of those set changes. So Saga 3 decides to go back to the drawing board and reroute these characters into looking more like their original designs, straight up ditching the realism as a result. And thank God they did, because 3's designs look incredible. All of the models are much nicer to look at now, especially characters like Xion and Cosmos. In fact, I'd argue that this is my favorite design for both of them throughout the entire trilogy. Made them even better with the fact that the cutscenes still look as good as they did in 2. Yeah, going back to the original designs thankfully did not mess with any of the cutscene direction, as it's still as top-notch as it's always been. I'd argue even better than it was in 2 than it was 3. Something that I, really shouldn't have to say out loud because, sequels should be better, but, sequels can be hit or miss in certain areas. But thankfully, all of the visuals of 3 were massive hits. They look so good that it actually kind of bums me out because I'll never get to see what a fully realized version of the style would look like for the rest of the games. Imagine what a PS3 or 4 version of these models would look like mixed together with this immense level of cutscene focus. It would have been a jaw-dropping to see what technical marvels they could have done. But alas, we will never know, and that is just a tragedy. And that's really all I have to say about visuals, so how about we get into the gameplay now? So unlike Xenosaga 2, which I feel really tried way too many things, and as a result ended up with a pretty flawed combat system, that just was downright sluggish overall, 3's idea was to just go back to the drawing board and start from scratch. Which in turn may seem like a bad thing, but in reality it really helps this game, as it actively feels a lot more fun to play. Some of the core aspects, like the boost mechanics and using skill points to unlock new abilities and stat increases, are still there, but it also dishes a lot of stuff that was honestly making the game more bloated than necessary. And while I do miss aspects that were removed, like the ability to attack the backs of enemies, along with the uniqueness of the strategy bar, it ended up helping immensely well in the long run, as the game felt a lot better to play this time. I honestly think removing them made it feel a lot smoother and fast-paced, which is a massive plus. Plus, it's not like they were just gone and that's it. To compensate for them not being anymore, this game adds in some cool new additions and returns to form. For one, they brought back the branching skill trees from the first game. Something I am immensely glad to see back, as that was one of my favorite aspects of the first game, and it was always sad to see it gone in the sequel. There's also the introduction of the all-new special attack system, which is activated by the utilization of your boost gauges. Yeah, boost gauges now have a second use in 3, where instead of just being used for extra turns, you can also use them as activation points for immensely strong special attacks that deal a hefty amount of damage to the enemy. I'm quite a fan of this, as I love how boosts now have multiple uses, so you can strategize around them more. Do you want to use them to launch a bunch of extra attacks, or do you want to level up your boost gauge for the sake of launching a super big hit? The choice is completely up to you. Plus, the special attack option ties well into the other new mechanic, the break gauge. That's right, folks, Cold Steel 3 didn't invent break gauges. And I know this revelation may blow your minds right now, but I need you to keep it together while I explain this. So how the break gauge works in Saga 3 is pretty simple. You just attack to fill it up, and you can either fill it up normally with simple hits, or you can use specific tech skills that fill the break gauge faster, which you can unlock more of either through leveling up or spending points on your skill tree. And these are very much worth getting because not only are they very strong, they are also unintentionally hilarious because depending on who you level up and get the skills for, you can see shit like this. I kid you not, I was laughing for like a minute straight when I first ever saw this. Now, when I mention the combat system out loud, I know it does kind of seem like they stripped away a lot of stuff, and that should be a bad thing. And admittedly, I can see why they think that way, but personally, I think removing all of this stuff helps the game in the long run more than hurts it. If I could compare it to anything, I'd say it's like Final Fantasy IX, where ditching and streamlining all of your mechanics actually helps it a lot more than hurts it. The difference is, unlike 9, you don't have to deal with the weird delays to animations, so the gameplay moves way faster. Plus, if you're looking for some innovation on the gameplay, well, don't worry, they actually do that with the improvements to the mech sections. So, one of the biggest changes 2 gave to the series was the utilization of the AGSWs outside of simple battles, as they stopped being simple forms you equipped, and now function more like the gears from Xenogears. This was a change that I was actually rather happy about, as the utilization of them was kind of lacking in 1. 2 makes them much more of a forefront focus as you travel around the maps a lot more using them, and 3 is where they are brought to their ultimate conclusion. As in 3, not only do you get to travel around with them even more than you did in the second game, but now they come with way more customization, which is awesome because they actually decided to finally fucking code in stores in 3. And I love the customization of the mechs. I'd say they're as fun to put together as they were in the original Xenogears, and that is a compliment of the highest order in my opinion. And, well, that's really all I have to say about gameplay. It's streamed down, but it's just immensely fun all around as a result. But even if the combat was fantastic, it's got absolutely nothing on how good the story and their characters were. Now, even if I did end up having gripes with Xenosaga Episode 1 and 2, I could easily always say that their characters and their storylines were pretty much flawless. In going into 3, I was rather invested because after the failure of Saga 2, they had to cut away the 6-episode story and make it into 3. So this game had to juggle 4 different games worth of narratives all at once. And when you hear me say that, it sounds like this game is going to be a train wreck in terms of storytelling. But in reality, it's actually incredibly impressive how they're able to take all 4 stories and blend them into one game with next to no issues. Are there flaws? Oh yeah, definitely. I genuinely don't think no matter who was working on this game, you could ever have done something like this without facing some sort of issues in storytelling. But man, the fact it's essentially telling 4 different narratives at the same time, and it isn't a total train wreck, is more than enough on its own. But the sole fact it ends up being one of the most entertaining stories told from the Xeno series is enough for me to tip my fedora to Takahashi. This man and his team did the impossible here, and they deserve all the respect in the world for making this game work under the ridiculous conditions it was dealing with. No spoilers, obviously. I want you guys to experience this game as blind as possible. But man, the story and the characters here are easily at their best that they've ever been in the final game of the trilogy, and it made it an absolute joy to go through. And with that said, let's talk about my last bit of praise, and that's the music. Yuji Kajikura does it once again and drops an absolutely stellar track on this series' 3rd and final entry. All songs like Fallout and Inferno are great to listen to, sure, but my personal favorite track has got to be We've Gotta Believe in Something. And that shouldn't really be surprised if you heard it, like, come on, I'm a Kingdom Hearts fan. I love those big sweeping orchestral tracks. Also, the song itself is just really fucking good and you should go listen to it, like, right now. Well, after you finish this video anyways, because I need the view time. I won't be able to exploit your views for ad revenue if I can't. Jokes aside, that's it for my pros. So now it's time we got into the cons. Okay, so in terms of cons for this game, I admittedly don't really have a lot to complain about. With a title with as big as an undertaking as this one, the fact that I can walk away with most of my complaints being minor nitpicks is actually kind of impressive in hindsight, so I'll just go ahead and get them out of the way real quick. I don't have anything to complain about in terms of visuals, I think it looks very nice, so I'll go over my minor issues with combat. I have a lot of praise for this game, as combat was a lot more of a return to form and allowed a lot more of the systems to breathe compared to the cluttered, sluggish mess that I thought Episode 2 was. But it did kind of come with some issues, and the first one was its break gauge. Now I think the break gauge is a great idea, but as the game continues, it becomes one of the most easy things to exploit. Characters like Ziggy, for example, are so easy to utilize their break damage skills that you can basically fill up the gauge insanely fast. And while a lot of the boss fights are still decently challenging, It does feel like at points this game just wants you to abuse the break gauge system for every fight. Another minor nitpick I had is certain skills you needed to equip items for to gain more boosts. As Xenosaga 3 goes on, you start unlocking skills that require you to have more than 3 boost gauges. Instead of just getting these through story progression or side bosses, you have to equip items in order to have more boost gauges. And I'm not really a huge fan of that kind of game design. I kind of just wish they were tied to defeating certain enemies instead of just, oh hey, if you didn't get this specific item, you can't use these late game skills. I know others will obviously disagree with me on this, but I've never really liked that as a mechanic. It always felt too restrictive in terms of customization. Outside of that, I don't have any other complaints about gameplay. Like, it's really hard to complain about the gameplay because everything is just so well done here. So let's get into my issues with story and characters. Now, I acknowledged in the pro section that this game was essentially having to tell the story of 4 different titles at once. And I will give my praise where it is deserved. They wrapped it up about as best as they could. But man, you can really feel the corner cutting and just straight up missed potential this title has due to how forced the team was. Again, I still stand by the fact that it's great. Maybe even one of the best stories they tell on the PS2. But god damn, there are so many storylines and characters that you can just tell were meant to have more to them. Like, the main one is obviously Telos, or Telos. This battle robot that you can obviously tell was meant to have way more to do with the narrative, especially in regards to the late game twist you get about her. Like, I'm dead serious, it really feels like that she was meant to have a rivalry with Cosmos as the series goes on, because when she's first ever introduced, you only get like one boss fight with her, and then you never see her until the finale. Fun fact, while I was streaming this, I even said out loud to myself that this feels like it was meant to be the end of the first game when I fought her for the first time, but instead we get her in like the first 5 hours or so, and then we only get her again in the last hour. Another character who kind of suffers from this is actually Ziggy himself, as in this game, you finally encounter the person who killed his wife and child, and he kind of really doesn't have a whole lot to do with them other than a boss fight and some dialogue. Again, like with Telos, you can just tell there was just supposed to be more of a dynamic here, but they don't have the time for it. They had to cut a lot of corners. And as a result, while you still get a pretty solid wrap up to everything in this arc, you can tell there was also meant to be a lot more here. Thankfully, those two are the only ones that really had that kind of problem, because every other party member felt like their arcs wrapped up perfectly. Was there anything else I had an issue with? Oh yeah, the Alan and Xion romance. Yeah, even after 3 games, they could never sell me on this. Granted, I think they did a better job with Alan in this game than the other two, and it did help me win him over a little bit on his character, but by the end, I really didn't care about the romance. Also, that fucking IT bitch does not deserve that fine temple of a woman, and I will forever stand on that. This ugly ass fucking NPC bastard. I sound like J-Man right now. You know what? Let's move on to my final thoughts. Xenosaga 3 is a game that really shows that even if you have a slip up or two along the way, you can easily get back on your feet if you know what you're doing. And while you can tell that there were areas in this game that had to be cut down due to, everything I've explained before, that doesn't stop this game from being an absolute masterpiece, and arguably one of the best things Takahashi has ever worked on. It just frustrates me fundamentally that after experiencing this, we will never get to see the full 6-episode story. There was a vision here that showed what would have been, and it would have been immaculate to see it fully fleshed out. But sadly, we will never get that. At least we've got Xenoblade, though! With all that out on the table, I think it's perfectly fine to give this game a very phenomenal 9 out of 10. And with that wrapped up, I have now beaten every single one of the Xenosaga games. And technically, this means I've now beaten every Xeno game that exists. Up next is the more recent Xeno era that we will be talking about. And man, oh man, I cannot wait to revisit that. And if you liked this video and want to follow along for more, especially since we're getting to the Blade era, do me a favor and like and subscribe down below. Leave a comment if you're up for a chat or you just want to help me in the algorithm. And if you want to hang out with me and the rest of my cool community, go check out my Twitch or Discord in the description down below. That's all, folks. Have a lovely day, and I'll see you next time for more RPG content.